advanced voice from the open AI side that came out this past week is what terrifies me the most because it is really good at being imperfect enough.
All right, well, it's going to keep me up.
Welcome to Barenaked Money, the podcast where we strip down the complex world of finance to its bare essentials. With your hosts, Josh Sheluk and Colin White, portfolio managers with Verecan Capital Management, Inc.
Welcome to the next episode of Barenaked Money. It's a podcast where we help give you the naked truth to make better financial decisions and hopefully turn those better financial decisions into more effective accomplishment of your goals. Colin, I think we have a really special guest today. Would you say he's the most special guest we've ever had?
Oh, absolutely. The most special. I mean, just look at the backdrop there behind him. I mean, that's almost magical. So I'm expecting like an absolute magical podcast. I think this is going to be extraterrestrial even.
Well, it's going to be out of this world. Good. So today's guest is a formal introduction. We have Matthew Toussain with us, and his LinkedIn bio reads very much like a resume for a military general. He's a cybersecurity expert. He's a red teamer and a purple teamer. I don't know what either of those things mean, but hopefully he'll give us some insights today. He's performed offensive and defensive cybersecurity operations. He's the grand champion, the first grand champion we've had on the podcast of the Net Wars Tournament of Champions. He's a former U.S. Air Force cyber warfare specialist. He's done work in password and identity access management, penetration testing, worked for Fortune 500 companies and what I would call some of the most security tight organizations on this planet. And more recently and currently the founder and CIO of Open Security, where he trains professionals and organizations to protect themselves against cybersecurity threats. So before they get slapped in the face from some of those cyber threats, they have a plan in place. So welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. It's a massive pleasure to be here. And that was an absolutely ridiculous introduction. I am beyond flattered.
Well, it's interesting. With that introduction, I would expect you to be way more stuffy than this. So I think that the oddity is the oddity is like you seem like a relatable person. So I can't wait to figure out what we're going to find out. This is going to be wonderful.
He mentioned that I sound like a general in stealth mode, and I'm like, oh, this hurts my heart and my soul internally because that's the last thing that I want to be characterized as. But I've known a general or two once upon a time.
that was my read of the LinkedIn bio there. So okay,
I think
we'll throw the general thing aside
eventually.
yeah, you got it. So turning to our conversation today, cybersecurity of all kinds, we have all kinds of our audience and our listeners and our clients that I think cybersecurity specifically is such a big concern for them. And it's something that I think it's a little bit intangible for a lot of people. So I'm hoping you can shed some light onto what's really happening sort of behind the curtains today. But I wanted to start here because I watched a video of yours not too long ago where during a live presentation, you hacked into your own bank account. And I thought it was so fascinating. It's such an interesting way to present everything. So can you explain a little bit about what you did and how you did it and why you did it?
I'd love to talk about that. In fact, let me start with the why. So I do think that from the perspective of cybersecurity, this is a much esoteric kind of career field or experience for a lot of folks. So like if we're talking about cybersecurity, generally speaking, we're either looking at the news, something bad happened, or we're looking at a family member or a friend and fraud happened. And that was also something bad that happened to somebody that we know closely to each other. And if we think about from a fraud-based perspective, it often has to do with your direct personal finances. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to demonstrate as a cybersecurity professional how vulnerable I myself am. And in that presentation, one of the things that I did in order to be able to hack into the bank account in the first place is I actually had to hack into my voter registration. Well, and I'm Alaskan, just for everyone's awareness. So I had to hack into my Alaska voter registration in order to figure out information about myself to then impersonate myself to the bank to overcome their security mechanisms and take over my own account. Now, why is it my own account? Because if it was anybody else's account, that'd be illegal, and I definitely couldn't do a presentation about that. But at the same time, what I was trying to demonstrate is how straightforward it is to be able to perpetrate an attack like this, and how baseline security measures, like using something like, let's say, multi-factor authentication, even if it's SMS onto your phone, let alone something like a multi-factor authenticator, can really change the paradigm for security for yourself, because you are absolutely a target. And we're seeing so many groups, organizations, individuals and even nation states targeting folks in order to monetize their cybersecurity operations from an offensive perspective. And so we've never really seen a world that is as vulnerable and as attackable as it is today, which means we've also never seen a world where your need for cybersecurity resilience, even on the basic level, is as stringent as it is contemporarily.
It's fantastic thing again, and I understand why we were so excited to get you on board, because oftentimes cybersecurity comes off like the mob. You're just trying to scare people into paying a whole bunch of money for protection for something they don't understand. And we pride ourselves on Barenaked Money of providing a balanced informational approach to things rather than a sensationalized, all your money is going to get gone sometime today unless you trust us and pay us a fee and we'll protect you. So that's a very, very wise opening, because I do think that there are basic steps that people can take, and but it's evolving. That's the other challenge is what worked 5 years ago or 3 years ago, it changes over time. So it's worthwhile keeping people informed so that they're aware of the kinds of things that are going on and also the basic steps they can take. So fantastic opening. Well done.
Thank you. And for the viewers' awareness, I'm a big proponent of open source software myself. And that is a little bit of a tangent based on what we're talking about. But one of my team's primary objectives, I run a company called Open Security, is to be able to lower the barrier to entry to make yourself as secure as is needed. And that might be for small businesses. For example, there's so many organizations out there that are these multi-billion-dollar companies, and they say, buy our stuff if you want to have the opportunity to even know that you're secure. And a lot of the stuff that we do is actually releasing open source and free software that other people can actually leverage in order to get that same kind of understanding of their own organization without having to pay that massive fee. Now, on the other hand, if you identify, oh my goodness, there's a huge problem set going on here, you may need to invest in that. But at the very, my take is that the very first step that you need to have is to understand what the value proposition is of what you're buying. And if you can't understand that for free, then you're really not ready to make that purchase in the first place. And one of the things that we're really passionate about is to help you get that understanding for free, and perhaps to leverage that understanding with effort and human capital, because I'm a really passionate proponent of human capital as opposed to, let's say, capital expenditures. We're talking about buying a software solution to accomplish something. I think that leveraging your folks, your team, in order to make yourself more secure is the vast majority of what security really is. We often make a joke about this in the cybersecurity field. We call it layer 8. And layer 8 refers to the human. We say the human is the most vulnerable part of cybersecurity. Well, guess what? Humans are also the most significant opportunity within the cybersecurity space to do better.
Lots of interesting things there, Matt. And I just wanted to come back to really a few things that we talked about there. But so coming back to getting access to the bank account, I believe that a lot of the information that you needed to get access to it was publicly available. And I guess this is a common theme these days with social media and how much is available published on the web that you can Google search with not much effort whatsoever. That's I guess a big challenge these days. Is that right?
Oh, 100%. This is something we refer to as open source intelligence gathering, or OSINT. And so effectively what we're able to do is using open source abilities that what I mean by that is things that are available on the internet. The very first style of looking for things on the internet is a Google search, right? I might Google your name. Maybe there's a lot of people with your name. Okay. Where are you from? What's your date of birth? How old are you? What do you look like? What are your family members? All of these things help us establish a profile around you, and we can leverage this in order to then look for things like government resources. And so in that very specific presentation that I was able to deliver, one of the things that I was demonstrating was that with just basic Google searching information, you're able to then move laterally into government available information and then identify things like voter registration records, at which point things like the home addresses of where people live at, where their family lives at. And these are really good factors if you're an adversary, like you're an attacker trying to do fraud. They're really good factors in order to directly identify a specific individual. And once you've identified a specific individual, now we're talking about things like social security numbers and the last bastion, if you will, that prevents them from getting access to things like your bank accounts. Given that the vast majority of this, let's say 80% plus of it, is available just directly on the internet if you know where to look and how to put different pieces of information together, that actually puts us in a really poor position from a security perspective at an individual level.
For a while there, it was trendy. At least I was seeing it quite often, where it was like, hey, do you want to know what your Star Trek name is? Give us the city you were born in and where you proposed to your wife, kind of thing. And then it would go, you're Captain Kirk. And there was a whole series of these things that were really, prevalent for a while. It was like, oh, I want to know what my Icelandic name would be. And it was a manufactured way of accumulating a whole bunch of those security question information. But I've seen that kind of die off. Is that, is that something in your world that people have finally caught on to, have stopped giving up, their pet's name and stuff like that in order to find out what their Viking name would be?
Colin, that's a fantastic question. I wouldn't say that we've given up on what your Viking name would be, but attackers have really started to focus on what is most useful for them in like a direct attack based perspective. And so what we're starting to see things like are, if you ever got a text message, right, where that text message is from someone who's like, hey, look, we went to dinner the other night. Do you remember me? Or they might say, hello, or they might say something like, hey, your tax number just came up and you need to pay us money. Now, a lot of people think of these things as perhaps fraud or perhaps maybe bad text messages or whatever it might be. But here's the thing. If you respond to any one of those messages, regardless of what it is, it tells the person who's receiving it that the phone number they reached out to is real and that the person that they reached out to on that phone number is a responder. And so effectively what has happened here is we've changed the game from the way that we do liveliness detection into a much more modern context. And so while we don't see the stuff that you're talking about as much today, we're actually seeing just a direct evolution of that, because the attacker's objective wasn't necessarily direct exploitation, it was liveliness detection, so that they could then sell that information as a direct factor to other people who are going to do that next step of attack on the internet. And so they do this on the dark web, if you will. Effectively, what this really represents is a massive evolution in the sophistication of attackers. Because we're not talking about one attacker who's trying to go after you. We're talking about like 100 attackers who are just collecting information so they can sell them to attackers who want to go after you. We're really talking about an ecosystem now of attack where it's not just one person or even one group, but it's a multifaceted organization of attack that's happening against individuals. And if you have to defend yourself against 100 people who do this for a living, that's actually a rather challenging thing to overcome.
Seems hopeless.
Yeah. Well, so give us some positive news here, Matt, because you mentioned multi-factor authentication, but I guess there's multiple ways that organizations and individuals are trying to protect themselves. So is multi-factor authentication the best way as an individual to go about that approach? And you mentioned open source software and security and all that stuff, but what else can we do? And you can make us feel a little bit better that we're not going to be violated by 100 people next week.
Well, when you put it that way, it makes me really think. But at the end of the day, we do actually have a rather significant set of opportunities to actually defend ourselves. Because look, if we think about an adversary, they have to monetize their attack in some way, shape, or form. Like if they cause us pain and damages, that is one thing and it sucks for us. I'm not going to lie, that is absolutely true. But they're not actually doing this stuff just to cause problems for individuals. They're doing it to make money. And what a lot of folks don't realize is that if we look at fraud-based organizations, many of those organizations in, let's say, Bangladesh, just as an example, they might actually be doing human trafficking to get what are effectively human slaves to be doing these types of attacks against individuals in the United States, for example, because we have kind of that cash, and oftentimes the monetization vector there is getting people or convincing people to buy like Apple gift cards or Google gift cards and then like distributing those. To be completely honest, like if we're talking about defending yourselves, if anybody says the word gift card and you don't know them on the phone, absolutely hang up immediately and call the organization that you think you're talking to back again, because that's a primary vector of monetization for attackers. And if we can kind of understand how they're trying to make money, then we can defend ourselves against those specific styles of attacks. But here's an example of why you may not need to be as afraid as you might think right off the bat, and why you perhaps, on the other hand, should be even more afraid. You see, if you've ever received an email and that email has a bunch of typos in it, right? You look at this email and you're like, oh, I'm the Nigerian prince and you are a member of my family from, once upon a time, and I didn't know how to spell the word the, but I still sent you the email. Guess what? You can make a lot of money if you just sent me, 10 grand first. the Nigerian prince scam has kind of worn itself out. And the reason why it fails now is because we understand it, right? We have educated ourselves on the fact that this is obviously malicious. And so adversaries have navigated their way to a different style of attack. What we need to understand is that they're still trying to monetize themselves. One of the best, most offensive things that you can possibly do is that if you have a conversation with somebody on the phone and they're asking something related to money whatsoever, and they called in, guess what? Hang up and call who you think that they were. Because if you call in, you're going to get the right organization after the fact. If they give you a callback number, but you look up the callback number and those don't match, that's fraud. That's exactly what that is. And there's a lot of opportunity to defend ourselves here. But let's go back really quickly, just very briefly, to the idea of these typos in the email, right? Why would there be typos in an email from a country like India, where the vast majority of English speakers on the planet actually live, because English is the first language there? It's something we refer to in the cybersecurity space as self-selection. For example, if you were dumb enough to click on an email where everything was a typo, then what does that mean when you get on the phone with those folks? You're likely going to be gullible enough to fall for whatever their scheme is. What they're effectively trying to do is they're looking for the lowest denominator. They're trying to identify via self-selection if you are the appropriate victim for them to spend their time against. If you're more resilient, you'll probably never experience these things at all because you've just staved off these attacks by default. Guess what? The attackers don't care about you because you're hard. You're hard to hack. But on the other hand, there are a lot more folks that are much more victimizable. And we need to be aware of that. And many of those people might be our family members, and we really need to educate them and share this kind of information with them as well, because they might be the most victimizable folks that are out there. And that can be very terrifying.
Well, in the sales world, they call that qualifying a prospect. So
that is exactly what it is in the sales world. 100%.
What you're telling me is like, we should study these organizations because they're really, really good at picking their audience. So, and it's funny you say that because I had a phone call from CRA a couple of years ago, and the guy called up and said, "I'm from CRA." Like, I laughed. I said, "Okay, you understand? I think you're not who you say you are." He goes, "Yeah, I know." I said, "All right, so I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call back the 1-800 CRA number. Who am I asking for?" And he gave me his name. He said, "I'll call you right back." And I did, and I got through to him. I was like, "All right, dude, seriously, how can I help you?" So yeah, that's absolutely is a good reflex. Like anybody, an inbound phone call and they start asking information, hang up. And if I can't call you back through a way that I recognize, we can't have a conversation. So good to know that I did the right thing. Not to
blow up the mic, Colin, but like honestly, like there needs to be a clap here because that is exactly what we're hoping for. Like, I'm a cybersecurity professional, right? I'm a nerd at heart, and I say a lot of words that in some cases people don't quite get. But the reaction that I want to see from folks is exactly what you did. That is on point. It is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'll pat myself on the back too. All right. So yeah, it absolutely works. And it is a strategy that I wouldn't call it infallible because again, they can spoof numbers and stuff like that, but it removes, it makes me difficult enough. I mean, it's the whole thing. I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you. And, you know, as long as I'm harder to crack than the people around me. So that's kind of a Darwinian way to look at this, and maybe not as uplifting as we want our messaging to be, but it's probably very true.
But if we look at it not as like an international like level, or we don't look at it as an interbusiness level, if we start to like boil this down to an interpersonal level, right, where it's you and it's your family, guess what? If you're talking about defending your family, outrunning the bear is what it's all about.
Yeah, true. Absolutely.
Now, speaking of family, Matt, you kind of alluded to it at the outset there that familial fraud can be a problem as well. And I know when we had the pre-call, you mentioned that's a growing and pretty big issue these days.
100%. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I've actually had the opportunity to talk to a lot of pension funds, like let's say the New York State pension funds for different like police organizations in the United States and such. And one of their biggest concerns that they are actively observing, right, like on a day-to-day basis, is familial fraud. And so the idea there is multi-factor authentication is beatable through a couple different mechanisms. Either A, I hack you so hard that we are seeing stars, you know, very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to accomplish for the value proposition that the adversary might get. So we might be able to see that kind of capability from nation state attacks, but nation states aren't looking to make money because, you know, I don't know if you know this, but countries can print money. But if we're talking about individuals who are trying to monetize their own operations, we definitely have this idea of cyber criminals who are professionals at doing these types of attacks. And that's bad. That's terrible. But these cyber criminals, they often need access to pieces of information that are really hard to get, like access physically to your own phone. Because if your phone is kind of the custodian for some of your access to your pension, to maybe your healthcare administration systems, maybe something like Gusto for benefits and such. All of those kind of things, generally speaking, the custodian of access is primarily password and then followed by some kind of phone-based second factor, multi-factor authentication component. Now, that multi-factor authentication component is really difficult for adversaries to bypass. And so if you're talking about a foreign state adversary, like let's say cyber criminals out of St. Petersburg, they're generally going to look to do something different and they're going to avoid you. But on the other hand, that is so easy for your family to gain access to. And you might not believe that that's going to happen. And this is such a terrifying thing because you trust these people, you love these people, and we're all struggling. The financial world is not the easiest thing to navigate, and living day to day is a struggle. And so if that happens to folks that are in your life and they have access to things that are also around you physically, and from a cybersecurity perspective, we're using those physical access things as tokens to demonstrate that you are who you say you are, suddenly somebody who's close to you can bypass by default all of the security mechanisms that organizations like banks generally rely upon. And so familial fraud isn't just a growing style of concern, but it's also a very easy one to see accessed and exploited. And we see this I wouldn't say primarily, but we do see the most egregious style of exploitation against the elderly who might not have the ability personally to be able to report this kind of attack happening against them, particularly when it's happening by somebody close to them.
Yeah, there's a real behavioral aspect to this when we speak to this, when we talk about behavioral economics and stuff. I mean, somebody can be a very trusted member of the family. They can be, a very honest person. But honestly, anybody in the right circumstances is going to do whatever they need to do. If I'm standing outside of a liquor store with a gun in my hand to 2 sick kids at home and I can't afford to feed them, I'm probably going to use that gun to get money out of that liquor store. And, that's just, that's how people would react. I could be a perfectly fine, upstanding citizen the rest of my life and everything else, but I found myself in a corner. And in a corner, even somebody who is a deeply trusted person could become motivated to do something that's completely surprising, but also completely understandable. And that's what people miss, right? It's like, yeah, I trust my brother. He's always done right by me, and we've never had a problem. And but he could have something going on in his world where that he gets to a point where, yeah, he's going to have to behave in a way that completely is out of character. And
I hate to that's an amazing point. And I hate to the flip side of this, but familial fraud against things like pensions is one of the most least violent crimes that lower income individuals can actually perform. And so I don't want to say that there's an alternative side to this that is positive, because it's all negative, it's all sad, and it's all unfortunate. But at the same time, one of the things that people have to recognize is that an alternative for those kinds of individuals might be robbing a liquor store, and instead they've chosen to rob their families instead.
Yay. That's not supposed to. Well, I guess it's less
violent. It's not good. It's less violent.
Yeah. But no, it's real, and I guess the key is, and you don't want to make people paranoid all the time, and older generations grew up in a time like, again, I started giving financial advice before there were computers. The world's changed, and I'm keeping up so far, I think, but at a certain point, people stop keeping up, and it all becomes magic to them, and they don't understand, and it gets more and more difficult to keep up with the stuff you need to be literate with in order to protect yourself. So.
And to that effect, let's take it one step further, because the defense is the same defense if it is your family attacking you, which would be very unfortunate for a large number of reasons, right? But it's also the same defense if somebody else is attacking you. So that kind of vigilance, if you're afraid of somebody external coming after you, is the same steps. Like you're not going after family. You don't have to have distrust in your family in order to be vigilant about your finances. If you're vigilant about your finances from an offensive perspective, let's say we're looking at North Korean intrusion set actors, which is actually a government that does do cybersecurity attacks to extract money from individuals. Like if we're afraid of those folks and we're doing the right level of vigilance to defend ourselves against them, that is the same exact set of procedures that we might want to do to defend ourselves against against people closer to us. And so while it is very fatalistic to kind of look at it from our inside point of view and be exceptionally paranoid, that's really not what I'm trying to recommend to folks, because it is rare for us to see that kind of fraud. It's just, it happens. And it's really important for folks to recognize that it does happen and to be a little bit more defensive in nature so that it is not possible to. Now, if you're say, let's say for example that you're a person a little bit elderly, you're getting a general, let's say, Social Security payment or maybe a pension fund or something of that sort, and you miss a payment. Maybe you miss 2 payments. Now, sometimes this stuff happens, and you might say, hey, look, the government just made a mistake. It's going to roll in. Guess what? That is not acceptable in today's world, because it's not necessarily the government that made the mistake. It's not that the pension just got missed. There might be identity fraud going on. And so if you want to defend yourself against what's happening, when something doesn't look normal, we have to raise our hand. We have to raise a red flag. We have to call people.
Yeah. And I'm sure Service Canada will get back to you in 90 days. 3 more payments missed, and maybe get to the bottom of it then, if our indication up here is any precedent. But I wanted to come back to the changes that we're talking about in the world, because as Colin said, there's no computers when he started giving financial advice, but now we have something called artificial intelligence, which can actually pick up the phone and have a conversation with you. And I actually got a call from what I think was some type of AI a few weeks ago, and just trying to, I don't know what it was trying to do, quite frankly. It was actually quite poor in its conversational skills, but still pretty incredible that something totally robotic can have a conversation with me that's dynamic and changing. And so what are you seeing in this space? I can imagine that it's getting more and more difficult, but how much more difficult is it getting, and where are we going from here?
This is a fantastic question. I'm going to actually start with being the reverse of hyperbolic and say why it's not that big of why it's not the end of the world today. And then we'll dive into exactly what's happening and what the fears are for tomorrow. I don't know if you saw the new advanced voice feature that got released from ChatGPT earlier this week, but I've been talking to it voice-based recently, and its intonation and its ability to pause and say, yeah, I know what you mean, but specifically the part of that is it is so unrealistic that it is terrifying. It just sounds kind of appropriate. And so one of the things that we're really afraid of in the cybersecurity industry is that we've had this big problem that is the underlying, underpinning of the weakest part of security for enterprises today, and that is phishing attacks. What does that mean? Effectively, I send you an email with a link in it, and that link goes to something malicious. You click on that link, and now I am you on your computer. That's effectively a phishing attack. Now, from a phishing-based perspective, what I could do is I could create one email ruse or a pretext that you want to click on because it's really, really good. One example that I had with my organization is that we were doing a phishing attack against an organization for them to understand, what their risk was for phishing. And we did a Google Maps on them. And we found out that there was an REI sports good across the street from their organization. So we sent every employee in their company an email that had a coupon that said the first 15 people who show up to REI sports good get the first $100 of their purchase off for free. And we got a call from the client almost immediately, because every single person in their business, well, maybe not every single person, but the vast majority of people in their business literally stood up, walked out, and went to REI. And the craziest part about this whole story is that REI looked at our fake email and said, oh, this must be from corporate. I guess it's real. And they honored it. Oh my goodness. That was totally not the intent of the cybersecurity engagement at all.
Well, that doesn't actually seem too dumb on the employees' part. if they all got $100,
I mean, they did make out like a bandit. But the big point there is that if we have a ruse, right, some kind of pretext that causes somebody to interact with an email, we're going to be successful as an attacker. We might not be as successful as we think we're going to be in that specific case. We wanted to get 3 or 4 clicks. We got 100 people leaving the business to go across the street to buy stuff. How many clicks do you think we got? All of them, basically all of them. And so the first thing that we need to kind of recognize from a cybersecurity kind of context there is that I can make one email, send it out to 1,000 people, and I can get 1,000 clicks as a result of that theoretically. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe we got 1%. That's still a click. Actually, it's still 10 clicks. But what about voice-based attacks? If I want to call you up on the phone and I say, hey, look, I'm Matthew Toussain. You believe me, right? Because my voice is very English centric. I'm very Anglo-centric. I sound like my first language is English. I must be a normal individual, right? Here's a direct example. The MGM got breached really badly, and so did Caesar's Palace by a group out of the United Kingdom. Because in the United States, we love British accents and we trust them implicitly. And so the moment that that happens, we just say, yes, sir, here's all of the access that you need to our environment. $170 million in damages was that compromise. Really, really bad. Now, the thing about these types of compromises is that they're very hard to scale. Because guess what? If I got to call you up on the phone, every minute of my time I spend doing that is a minute of your time. It doesn't scale laterally. If I send you an email, that's 1 minute of my time, 1,000 minutes of everyone reading that email's time. Artificial intelligence fundamentally changes this paradigm because suddenly we can say, let's build this pretext, let's make AI do all of the calls, and now AI, voice-based social engineering attacks are as scalable as email attacks. This is a fundamental change in the way that we're seeing cybersecurity attacks being performed against organizations and individuals, and it is something that terrifies us out the yin-yang. Now, positive side of this, because that sounds terrible. We're not seeing as much of this as we expected. We're actually seeing adversaries employ these kinds of attacks at a much slower pace today than we expected that to happen. We expected us to kind of be underwater at this point. We are seeing adversaries doing this. It's absolutely happening. And we're seeing that rate increase over time, but it hasn't gone exponential yet. So there's still time to defend yourself. There's still time to recognize that this type of attack is happening and is inevitable.
What's funny is that here's a Barenaked story for you. So Catherine, who does all of our marketing for us, she was using a program to clean up our audio. And, it was removing all of the verbal tics from our audio before we published the podcast. And then we started being accused by listeners of, you guys are just, it's just all AI generated. It's like, no, what do you mean? It's like, well, it's all rehearsed. It's all robotics. Like, what do you mean? So I went digging to figure out how we got there. And it was like, well, we cleaned it up too much, right? So, I mean, it's interesting in real time. We're learning these things, right? I think I'm making it better. Oh, no, I'm making it worse. I think, again, everybody's learning right now on how imperfect do you need to be to sound real. Like it's almost the Turing test, right? What does it take to be human? And if you can fake being human, then that's the highest level that you're going to get to. But it has to be imperfect enough.
That is a fascinating way to lay that out. I do think you're 100% right. The most powerful word in the world today is
Yeah, exactly. Do you use it enough? Do you enunciate it properly? Did it sound natural? And most people don't put that much thought into it, but it subconsciously, I think, is how we get comfortable with somebody. If they're imperfect enough that we can relate to it, and it doesn't sound too rehearsed or too polished or what have you.
And advanced voice from the open AI side that came out this past week is what terrifies me the most about that, because it is really good at being imperfect enough.
All right, well, it's going to keep me up.
My GPT is still a little too optimistic. It needs to be a little bit more derogatory, I think. And then it will be totally believable once it becomes, it needs to take itself down a couple notches to the more human level.
You're 100% correct there. My most common response is, you're absolutely right.
I know, exactly. Yeah, you're correct. That's a very inspiring insight. And I was like, it wasn't that inspiring.
Wow, how are you such a genius?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, on the software and tech side of things, so it sounds like your firm, Open Security, is very intent on sort of making some low-hanging fruit available, I guess, to maybe potentially small business or larger organizations. But like, we're a small business. I know it's something that maybe a lot of small businesses are neglecting, perhaps, or they're more vulnerable than they think they are. So is there something that you can tell us on the optimistic side of things that this software and technology and protection is more accessible for businesses of our size than we would think?
Sort of. So I've got pros, cons, and like middle ground pieces to say here. I think that the open source world has actually grown very significantly and very rapidly in this space, which means that if we were talking about like baseline resilience, it has never been easier as a small business to be able to find the opportunity to defend yourself against standardized threats than right now. For example, one of the most big vulnerabilities that we're talking about actually came out this week in cybersecurity, that is, and it is a Microsoft related vulnerability that affects everything. It's like kind of one of those sky is falling, Chicken Little style vulnerabilities. And for your organization, you may or may not know if you're affected by it. Guess what? There are open source scanners that are really powerful at identifying those kind of things. You don't need to have paid for a Qualys or a Nexpose from Rapid7 or a Tenable's Nessus product. You don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars to be able to identify these vulnerabilities in your environment anymore. But that is the lowest hanging fruit, if you will. If we're starting to talk about things like artificial intelligence attacks, then guess what? Resiliency is really important for your organization. So things like more advanced antivirus or I don't want to use the word antivirus. I did. I apologize for using that word. I hate using that word. We generally speak refer to these things as endpoint. Take it out. I mean, maybe it's worthwhile for me to apologize for saying that antivirus might be okay. Endpoint detection and response systems are what we tend to refer to these days. So things like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is a good example there. Those end up being like the next bastion of security for a lot of organizations, particularly on the small business side. Because when we're talking small business, we don't have a lot of time to review logs looking for security events that may have happened. Because guess what? Your organization might not experience a major security event for a year. But then when you do experience one, that could be an existential crisis for your organization. And so we're in this really weird space where the risk impact is exceptionally high, but the likelihood might not quite be there. And how do you account for that? And generally speaking, our recommendation tends to be resiliency, as in if you are basically not the low-hanging fruit, adversaries don't want to contend with you because all you're going to do is take more time for the amount of value that they're able to extract in general. And so if we can make that low-hanging fruit disappear from your organization, that doesn't mean you're secure, but it does mean that you're not the primary target of most adversaries today. And we can work with that.
And that's one of the things that we've taken on internally is we actually have a weekly video that goes out to the entire team, and then we log who's watching the video, and it's a very short little video on whatever's topical in the cybersecurity world, because as you pointed out, the human side can be, that's can be one of the first lines of defense, and one of the things that people try to co-opt. But trying to alert our team. So, that kind of stuff I found interesting how easily available and how cost effective those kinds of things can be. And just by, that one instance of taking and then putting it top of mind of our whole team weekly, how important it is, and perhaps highlighting some of the attacks that are currently going on. Again, just that awareness. And you're right, we're just trying not to be the easiest ones on the street. If we can be a little bit harder, I think that's a reasonable objective to maintain, right?
That fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share a story about that kind of thing specifically. So I was doing a voice-based phishing attack for a bank, a major US-based bank. And one of the things that we were trying to do with this voice-based phishing attack was identify if we could extract sensitive information. And so what I did is I said, hey, look, I was recently the victim of a identity theft. Now, that's not true by any means. I'm lying, of course, because I'm doing a voice-based phishing attack. That's the point. And so I said, hey, look, you're asking for my last four of my social security number. If you give me the middle two, I'd be more than willing to give you the last four. And the support personnel on the bank side did commit to giving me those middle two. Now, from the perspective of U.S. social security numbers, the first 5 digits are generally speaking based off of where you were born, what hospital you were out of, those kind of things. And the last 4 are often shared through many different mechanisms, but they're randomly generated. The bigger point here is that those middle 2 are the hardest numbers to acquire from a social security perspective, but nobody knows that. Nobody knows that. Why on earth was the bank even allowing their support personnel to have access to the full social security numbers when the only thing that they need to do is verify the last 4? That was just not something that was thought about, right? And so this is the kind of attack that happens often, but it is an attack on layer 8. It's an attack on the individual, and I kind of reject it being the individual's fault. I think that it just means that we didn't develop a good enough security grid to say, hey, look, you didn't need access to the entire social security number. You only needed access to the last 4. And so the fact that they were able to get the other digits from you is our mistake, not yours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a fantastic way of looking at it. And, siloing information so that, it again makes it more difficult for somebody to acquire all the pieces of it. So that's a fantastic thing at an organizational level that you got to keep an eye on.
Interesting enough, in that scenario, they also identified the fact that me asking for that was very weird. And so after the call ended, they did a full investigation back scene in order to identify whether or not it was legitimate or not. They found me out by like as a person, that I was not who I was claiming to be whatsoever. And so on our report, we actually had a huge positive finding for them because they were able to do a full investigation without even needing to reach out to authorities and to identify that this kind of scenario was A, not legitimate, and B, directly malicious in general. Now, to be fair, we were paid by their security team in order to come in and do this kind of thing. And so they reached out to the security team as the end point of this. And the security team was like, well done, you identified the attack. But that's exactly what we're looking for, because the next step of that, of course, might be notification. Like if it was real world, might be notification of the individual who is attempting to be exploited. And that's really valuable, because what a lot of folks don't necessarily realize from a banking perspective or from a small business perspective is you might not be the endpoint victim, but you might be being leveraged in order to get more information against the person who is the primary victim. For example, if I wanted the social security number of an individual, not to get access to their bank account, but get access to other things related to them, going after their bank and trying to extract that information might be the only thing I'm looking to acquire from the bank in the first place.
You mentioned CrowdStrike, Matt. Now, this is, I think, a name that we're familiar with. Like people like us that are more lay people on the cybersecurity side, Colin and I, we're more familiar with this name because of its prevalence in the media outages, specifically over the past couple of years. It seems, and we're talking about siloing information as well, it seems like to be more secure, we need to build more complexities and difficulties and inefficiencies in our business. So how do you work with businesses to help them manage those two things or balance those two things?
That is a very interesting way to look at it, but I can't actually disagree with the take, because you're right. Oftentimes what we're looking to do is to engineer specific inefficiencies into the business that affect adversaries but don't affect employees. Because if we're causing inefficiencies to adversaries, we're effectively doing is saying, hey, look, your initial access to delivering effects, maybe it is ransomware or something like that, takes X and Y time. What we're going to do is we're going to introduce inefficiencies, and we're going to spread that time out so that we have more opportunity to detect and respond before you actually win. So delivering inefficiencies into the attack process for adversaries is actually a core part of what we do in cybersecurity. So I love that you kind of laid it out in that kind of fashion. The other side of that, though, is delivering efficiencies from a defensive perspective. And resiliency has a lot to do with that. We can actually break it down into very specific pieces. I think that it's really important to recognize the network side and then the system side of these approaches. So how is the defenses looking like on your personal system that you're using to access the environment? And then what do the defenses look like in the environment itself in order to identify, detect, and respond to the attacks that are happening kind of live and in real time?
So I'm actually really disappointed that we made it this far into the conversation without talking about this. But you mentioned monetization, and being investors, we have to talk about cryptocurrency and specifically Bitcoin, which we get asked about all the time from an investment perspective. But all we hear about from a practical use perspective of Bitcoin is that criminals use it to transact. Is it, well, let me start with this. Is it true that hackers just want Bitcoin and that's what they're going to demand all the time?
Hackers generally want some kind of monetization vehicle that is as anonymized as possible and is as convertible into some kind of currency owned by a country as possible. Now, the most common currency, of course, is the US dollar from that perspective. But the US dollar and the exchanges related to the US dollar are also the most trackable, extraditable, if you will. So like if you're trying to do something that is related to criminality, the last thing that you want to do is deal with a Bitcoin wallet that is in the US. And let me give a direct example here. So the Colonial Pipeline breach, right? The Colonial Pipeline breach affected basically the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. Adversaries got into Colonial Pipeline due to some very significant cybersecurity failures. They were very, very bad. But the bigger point is the attacker got in. They didn't actually affect the operational technology network. Operational technology effectively means cyber physical systems. So the pipeline, as we're talking about in Colonial's specific situation, the attackers never touched the pipeline, but the pipeline went down. Why? Colonial personally made the decision to turn the pipeline off because the attackers got into their billing system, which wasn't touched the pipeline at all, and they couldn't figure out how much to charge their customers anymore. As they said, you know what, if we can't figure out how much to charge you, let's just turn it all off because, you know, capitalism is king. At the end of the day, from the colonial perspective, what we're really dealing with here is that we've got attackers who are trying to make money. And the attackers don't want to cause international incidents. And so they're not going after the OT network, they're going after the IT network. In this case, Colonial made an international issue when they turned off that pipeline. And it caused an OT effect, even though the attack was against their information technology systems, SharePoint devices, effectively. And so what the attack group did, DarkSide was the name of the group, they said, oh my gosh, this is crazy. We don't want to go to jail. We definitely don't want to go to jail over $4 million. It's not worth it. We make that in a weekend. And they left all of the money in a US-based Bitcoin wallet. And so what the Department of Justice did is they seized it and said, look, everyone, crime doesn't pay. But the reason why crime didn't pay is because the attackers very specifically said, we don't want to go to jail, and they left it in a US-based Bitcoin wallet. So when we talk about cryptocurrency, from an adversarial perspective, the first thing to recognize is that it is traceable. Like we think about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general as if it were completely anonymized. It is not. We can trace where these wallets go. We trace where the transactions go from one wallet to another wallet. And the way that adversaries are able to directly monetize is by pulling information and data, and specifically Bitcoin currency, if you will, or any kind of cryptocurrency, out of a given wallet that is in a extradited capable state and moving it into one that is not. So we might see something like Ecuador or Russia or the Ukraine traditionally, many Eastern European states as well, as a way to get the money out. Now, does that mean that the FBI is not aware of who did it? No, that's not the case at all. We know. We absolutely know, because it is rather more traceable than people believe. It's just we don't have the international authority to do anything about it.
So Bitcoin goes to US Bitcoin wallet, gets transferred over to Russian Bitcoin wallet. Then what happens when it's there?
Generally turned into something like rubles.
So rubles are a better investment than Bitcoin in the criminals' minds.
Well, so from a criminal perspective, they care about cash. They do not like cryptocurrency at all. Cryptocurrency is just a really easy way for them to convert cash from one style to another style.
That's where we wanted you to get.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's the punchline.
Even the criminals don't like holding on to crypto. It's good to transact.
Yes, I could double down on that. If criminals hate holding on to crypto, they divest out of crypto as fast as they possibly can post an engagement.
That builds on the understanding, because crypto is one of those things people are beginning to trying to understand more, and it's evolving and how people are using it. And again, this is just hilarious for us to come to the realization of that this is the truth. They want regular currency.
So what about the idea, though, that the cryptocurrency wallets, if you want to call them that, or the infrastructure in general, is like virtually unhackable? Is that, like, we've seen all kinds of vulnerabilities in the crypto space, but it seems like that's happened more on the exchange side of things, or there was some issue that was kind of outside of the true intention of what crypto is at its core. So so we've kind of debunked the anonymity part of crypto, but is the safety and the invulnerability of crypto, is that true?
I love this question, and I'm going to try very hard not to nerd out a little bit too hard over it, because cryptocurrency is effectively just cryptography. All it is cryptography that we've attached monetizable value to. That's it. And so if you look at like your password, let's say you log into a Windows device on like your computer, right? And so you log into that computer, you type in your password. Your password is, of course, password, because the most common password in the world is password1. Why not? And so you log into your computer. Does your computer understand your password as the word password? Well, no, it converts that using a mathematical function. We call it a hashing function into a string. In the case of, let's say, an NT hash, that's your Windows kind of credential, that can be up to a 128 character password. And it can also be a password as low as 1 character. But either way, you end up with this singularized hash as a result. And effectively, what Bitcoin is just a list of hashes. We often refer to these things as like immutable registries, if you will. And that's effectively what it is. It's just a list of hashed events that have occurred, and these are all just basic mathematical functions, which means that there's two ways that we can go after attacking these. Either A, the mathematical function itself is broken and we can break it, or we can do something against it. This is rather uncommon to happen because we've been doing cryptography for well, technically millennia, but if we're talking about cryptography in a computer sense, we've been doing it since World War II. So we've been doing a lot of cryptography. Cryptography is generally pretty well developed, but if there were to be a cryptographic based issue, it could fundamentally break the entire thing. And we often look at quantum as an example of that potentiality. Now, that is a very big challenge, tangent, that is. On the other hand, we could look at the implementation of this technology and of this math into systems. And so you mentioned that exchanges being hacked are the primary way that we're seeing cryptocurrency style cybersecurity issues occur. And that is absolutely right, because effectively what we're saying is the crypto itself isn't vulnerable, but the way that we're implementing this ecosystem where cryptographic technology is being leveraged is vulnerable. And that's what's happening with those exchanges.
Yeah, that was one of the first ones that I remember seeing. Again, not to nerd out too much, Mt. Gox was one of the first real big ones that got hit. And then I started reading about it, and it was a repurposed server that originally was for trading cards. It was Magic the Gathering Online Exchange was the original use for the Mt. Gox server. And they flipped it over to a crypto server. And it was like, yeah, the probably wanted to have a more substantial server to run things on then, because you put a few $1 million on there and then all of a sudden it became a target. So yeah, it's an evolving ecosystem, and just don't trust it.
100%. And then secondarily, to double down on that, the idea there from a security perspective is often segmentation. So let's say, for example, that I'm doing cybersecurity work and I'm testing banks to see if they're vulnerable. If I'm doing that from my own personal computer, guess what else I'm doing from my own personal computer? Maybe I'm checking Twitter or I'm doing whatever else on the web, and that computer could be vulnerable as a result of that. From a cybersecurity perspective, the right way to treat these things is to split them off. We call this segmentation. And in the case of Mt. Gox, well, why do you have a server that is primarily for Magic the Gathering doing something completely unrelated to Magic the Gathering? Why not have two servers? Because if you do, if one is vulnerable to something, it doesn't affect the other all of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I like from this conversation, and I think because at the end of the day, the privacy is not a thing. Like if somebody really wants to learn everything about you and they're determined enough, that's going to happen. But that's okay, because your defense is you just need to not be the easiest one. And there's a lot of people out there who are going to be really easy to targets for stuff like this. So the challenge is not about trying to find a way to be 100% invulnerable. It's just being hard enough that there's no reason anybody would ever want to go to the lengths it would take to get in your world. So I feel better, just coming to that conclusion and recognizing that's the goal, because and I think this is important for people to really understand, is like there's no such thing as private information. Everything about you is knowable if somebody's determined enough. Just don't make yourself a target and make that difficult for them to get to.
Yeah, and I think that's an extremely important takeaway to have for folks, because when I started in cybersecurity, I just wanted to hack stuff, right? I was this kid. I loved computers. I wanted to hit my hands on the keyboards. I was working for the U.S. Air Force and the NSA at the time, and I just wanted to get into things that were not supposed to be gotten into. But that's not really what cybersecurity is all about. At the end of the day, it's all about risk management. And that's the same thing that's true for folks who have a cybersecurity risk associated with them. You've got accounts. That means you are a potential victim. But that doesn't mean you are the primary one either. What is your risk, and how much lengths do you need to go through to manage that? Some lengths for sure. But for a lot of folks, it's not something that we can't overcome.
So are you one of those kids that got caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing? Instead of jail time, you decided to go work for the government? Is that your origin story? Am I talking to a Bond villain right now?
It is not quite my origin story. Back in the day, there were two ways to go about it. Either you sold your soul to the government, or you did something illegal and then you sold your soul to the government to not go to jail. In my case, I did the first thing first.
Oh, okay.
I went to the U.S. Air Force Academy. I immediately sold my soul right off the bat.
There you go.
So it was super easy.
Well, we're coming up on an hour here, Matt, but you mentioned quantum, and that's a big tangent, but maybe you can turn quantum into a little tangent for us just as we kind of wrap up here, because what I've been hearing about quantum is basically all of the encryption that we've ever had, it becomes immediately hackable within seconds once you have quantum computing. And I think that's still a ways away is what the consensus is, but maybe you can give us some type of optimistic tidbit to leave on.
I would love to. And fortunately, in this case, I do get to be very optimistic, because none of that is true. It is true for all of the cryptography that we've had over the last 40 years, but there's this thing called elliptic curve cryptography, which, oh man, don't quote me on dates here, but was invented quite a while ago. And we've been rotating a lot of the cryptography that we leverage into that style of mechanism. And we effectively refer to this type of thing as being like resistant to quantum style cryptography. And the vast majority of things that we really rely on, like the underpinnings of the internet, or have already moved into that. Like if we were saying, hey, quantum computers are here and they're fantastic and they're amazing and they're breaking everything 10 years ago, then suddenly we're sitting on top of a problem. Unfortunately for the people who want to be sensationalizing things, it turns out that we've actually been developing security mechanisms against the potential for quantum cryptography breaking mechanisms for the past, oh man, I'm going to say 20 years, but it might honestly be longer than that. More importantly, many of these defenses are no longer theoretical. They're starting to get rolled into real world systems and have been doing so for the past 5 to 10 years. So I'm no longer afraid of cryptography. Ask me the same question 10 years ago, I'm terrified. The next world-ending event, the next Y2K, it's going to be all about quantum breaking our cryptography. AES is dead, long live AES, all of these kind of things. But today, it is suddenly no longer a primary vector of concern that I have. Now, to be fair, is this going to break things? Yes. Do you have old systems in your environment? Yes. Why is this going to break things? Because you have old systems in your environment, not because it's breaking the newest stuff that we're starting to roll out. This is a problem that exists. It's a real problem, but it's a problem that has a solution.
This is amazingly positive. I'm not feeling the need to give up at all.
Not Fantastic. At all. Not at all. Yeah. Oh, and we tend to be optimistic here about the future. So I think we're both very grateful that you've been able to share some optimistic perspectives on the cybersecurity space, Matt. So we appreciate so much the time that you've shared with us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Colin, Josh. I hope that I didn't nerd out too hard because you asked me a couple questions here that just absolutely made my heart throb, and I could not help myself.
You're amongst friends, and I think a lot of our listeners would count themselves among friends. So this will find an audience. We sincerely thank you for your immense knowledge and your perspective. It's odd to find somebody who has the depth of knowledge who can actually put a sentence together, and you don't at all look like an avatar. You don't look like you're AI generated. You look real. So I mean, this is just, we ticked all the boxes. So we're great.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. This was a stupendously fun conversation to have.
Thanks again, Matt. And I think it leaves on, again, a positive note. And for all of our listeners and our audience, it reinforces some of the principles that we have here, Verecan, being optimistic, being thoughtful, being process-driven. But at the end of the day, we all need to protect ourselves and be smart about it.
We didn't like the way investment management firms worked in Canada, so we built Verecan, something different. You can find us at annoyingthecompetition.com.
For more information on the subject of today's podcast or any other financial topic, please visit us online at verecan.com. That's Verecan.com. There's plenty of information there, or you can reach out to someone on the team. Thanks for listening.
Please note, the information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only. It is not intended as financial, investment, legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. Our discussions are not a solicitation to buy or sell any securities or to make any specific investments. Any decisions, based on information contained in this podcast, are the sole responsibility of the listener. We strongly advise consulting with a professional financial advisor before making any financial decisions. Listeners should be aware that investing involves risks and that past performance is not indicative of future results. Barenaked Money is produced by Verecan Capital Management, Inc., a licensed portfolio management company in Canada. We operate under the regulatory framework established by the provincial securities commissions in the provinces within which we operate. The views expressed in the podcast are our own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any regulatory authority. Remember, at Verecan Capital Management, Inc., we focus on aligning our goals with yours, prioritizing integrity and transparency. For more information about us and our services, please visit our website. Thank you for listening, and let's continue to challenge the norms of the financial services industry together.